I'm going to take all the attendance at this morning's meeting as further indication of the importance of the topic. My name is James Paxson. I'm the general manager for Hacienda here in Pleasanton. And I actually get to welcome you here with two hats this morning, both in my capacity as a board member of the East Bay Leadership Council and as the current chamber chair for the Pleasanton Chamber of Commerce. Owing to the special urgency, obviously, to address issues of water availability, development, and supply, these two organizations have come together to bring you this morning's forum so that we can better educate ourselves on the steps necessary to help ensure a secure water future for the Tri-Valley. The East Bay Leadership Council has a long-established water task force that has devoted considerable time to the examination of water issues, and it's under the auspices of this committee that we meet here this morning to continue their excellent tradition of bringing forward information, subject matter experts, and thought leadership to help form and develop policies and positions. Likewise, the Pleasanton Chamber, through its Vision 2020 and its Government Affairs and Economic Development Committee, also has a history of similar convenings designed to help inform public discourse and on topics of importance. In acting in this capacity, both organizations have as a fundamental objective the maintenance of a strong local economy and the expansion of an environment that allows local communities to thrive. It is therefore fitting that we take up this subject today, as the functioning of this fundamental resource has a direct bearing on this region's ability to prosper. And quite frankly, I'm hoping we can get our hills back to this color over here of green that you see on the backdrop over here. I think that's sort of an aspirational backdrop for today's meeting, and hopefully something we can look forward to soon. Couple of just notes of thanks really quickly. One, I want to thank the city of Pleasanton for the donation of this facility this morning. It's a great place to have an event like this, and we really appreciate their support. Our city manager, Nelson Fialo, is here in the audience, and again, just want to thank the city for everything that they've done to help bring this together. I would now like to introduce Bob Whitley, who's the principal at Whitley, Berchet & Associates and one of the co-chairs of the East Bay Leadership Council's Water Task Force, who will provide some background on today's discussion and introduce our distinguished panelists. Bob?
So welcome to our regular monthly meeting of the Water Task Force. We do meet monthly and we do talk about various topics of water, but today's format is obviously different, as is the significance of about what we're going to talk about. We will dispatch with some of our normal routine activities that we normally do, but I do want to make sure that Kristen Conley is our leader, our president of the East Bay Leadership Council. So if anybody has any questions about East Bay Leadership Council and its value to the community, please see her. And Ann Spalding, where's Ann? Ann is right next to her, is one of my co-chairs who helps with the organizing. And so if anybody has any questions about what we're doing, see Ann. I'm going to start this off with a little bit of history, going back to the spring of 1973. That was, for some of you in the audience that remember 1973, that was the beginning of the Arab oil embargo, where oil resources were restricted for import into the United States. That led into long lines with shortened hours of vehicles being able to be refueled, lots of animosity, lots of anger, lots of debate. And that led to the debate about what would be the nation's energy policy. It also led to establishing what became foreign policy of the United States for many years, for which, much of which we're still reflecting on. What happened in that debate was the evolution of an energy policy that formulated into things like solar panels, wind turbines, geothermal plants, demand reductions, Energy Star labels on appliances, building code revisions, all leading to a combination of demand reduction. It also led to policies and innovation and on the supply side. Supply side now, which is in the debate of what is the role of fracking and its impact. Last week I read an article that amazingly the oil supply capacity of the United States now is such that we are independently removed ourselves from foreign oil. We can now produce enough energy, oil, in the United States to satisfy our ongoing demands. It's even gotten to the point where some are advocating that we have so much capacity we should be able to sell some of that crude oil, to foreign countries. That is a change of the policy debate. What we should be being very careful about is now we're talking about making money off our natural resources by selling it foreignly. That was 42 years ago that the crisis happened and our thirst for oil led to our now national independence based upon a national debate about energy policy. So what about our thirst for water? Where does that lead us? Well, I don't need to tell you here what is happening in your communities with the 35 to 40 to 45% reduction on your water consumption because of a lack of supply. There are many reasons why that's the case. But today we're here to start talking about a dialogue or maybe even a debate about what should be the water policy and maybe reflect on what the debate was on the energy policy. So we have compiled, and just back to the grassroots, but one of the grassroots, of course, I was one of those that had to sit in line at a gas station in 1973. But can you imagine this? There are trucks, there are cars lined up at our local wastewater treatment plants and long lines, long adversity just to get some water. To the credit of the DSRSD treatment plant operations, they initiated that and it is now being copied around the region and maybe even the state. I was at a meeting in Redwood City a couple months ago, and the story was from about a man who was a coach for youth baseball in Cupertino. That man made several trips a week, 100 miles round trip from Cupertino up to DSRSD to get his load of water to be able then to go back and water his field of dreams. That's a grassroots message that it's incomprehensible to me that there are lines of people that are striving to get into wastewater treatment plants. Never before in our history is that the case. So, with that background, I would like to then set the format for us. We have 4 speakers, 1 insider and 3 outsiders, that are going to talk about some of the policy ideas that are now being circulated and under consideration in the water community here in the Livermore-Amador Valley. I will introduce all 4 at once, and when I introduce them, 3 of them will come up onto the stage, and then they will each have 15 minutes to tell their story, and then they will, when they're finished, and Ann is going to be the timekeeper. She's going to make some noises over there if they start to run late. And then they will sit down, and the next speaker will come up, and then the third, and then the fourth. After which, then we will open it up to participation in the audience and with questions and so forth. The 2 topics is one of which is the ongoing planning activities of Zone 7 on their water supply equation. And the second topic is a report recently prepared and distributed in draft form by Dublin San Ramon Services District on some diversification models that they have been talking, the three outsiders have had a chance to receive and read and think about that particular written report. They are not here representing DSRSD or DSRSD's ideas. They're independent thinkers that have the benefit of with their experience and knowledge to read a report and give us their comments. The three have not collaborated on their comments, so it's their individual thoughts that you will hear. And I have not, as a Water Task Force co-chair, coached them as to what they should say or not say. So this is some very experienced people that are here to share with you their ideas based upon their knowledge, education, and overall experience. Hopefully, at the end of the day, you will be confused, but it will be thought-provoking and therefore cause some further discussions as to what would be the future water policy actions that can begin implementation and hopefully be completed in a much shorter time than 42 years. So with that, our four speakers will be Brad Ledesma. Brad is an associate engineer working for Zone 7, and he's responsible for the integrated planning section on water supply and flood protection. Zone 7 is the water wholesaler that sells water to the retail utilities that then sell water to the customers. He has over 16 years of experience in environmental water industry. He graduated from the University of Pacific and obtained a Master of Science degree from Stanford University. So that's our first speaker. Our second is Nusha Ajami. Nusha is the Director of Urban Water Policy at Stanford University and the Water of the West program. She's a hydrologist specializing in sustainable water resource management, water policy, and the water, energy, food nexus. She received her PhD in civil and environmental engineering from UC Irvine and MS in hydrology and water resources from University of Arizona. But more than, and Nusha, that's what she wanted me to say. Nusha also has been appointed by the governor to be a member of the Regional Water Quality Control Board, San Francisco Bay Region. Therefore, she's in a very influential, very important position, decision-making body related to water quality issues of the San Francisco Bay Region. But more importantly, she's a star in my mind. She's really quite accomplished. Growing up as a girl and educated in Tehran, she left Tehran to come to the United States to be further her education. She's obviously stayed here and has become quite accomplished in leading some of the best minds in water policy at Stanford at this point. So I'm very pleased that Nusha is with us today. Our third speaker is Jerry Gilbert. Jerry is now as a consultant, but he is also very accomplished in his career in that he was a general manager of the East Bay Mud Utility District and is a consultant in the engineering, had an engineering practice. He was also chair of the State Water Resources Control Board. Also then very experienced in the decision-making policy direction when he was on that body, and was very instrumental in supporting and working with legislators in adopting some very significant water policy legislation. And finally, the fourth chair that appears to be empty, but that will be Dr. B.J. Miller. B.J. is visiting family in Kentucky and has agreed to participate in today's session via Skype. And so when his turn comes up, all of a sudden BJ's great picture will show up on the screen, and then he will give his presentation and will then participate throughout. BJ got his basic engineering education at Vanderbilt, came to Berkeley, got his PhD in water quality, worked for Bechtel for a number of years and concentrated as a consultant in water quality matters, and particularly on water resource issues in the Central Valley. So that is our panel. Again, we will go through all four for the next hour. Then we will start to take questions and comments afterwards. So would Brad, Nusha, and Jerry please come forward. So Brad, you started off, and when you're finished, then Nusha will come right up, and then Jerry, and then we'll have the video program. Thanks very much. And here's the remote.
Does my time start now? Good morning. My name is Brad Ledesma. I work for Zone 7 Water Agency. You know, Mr. Paxton, I think the green hills are coming because winter is coming. And I think we're all preparing for that. And I think it's great to take a break from preparation of El Nino and take a really hard look at reliability, drought, a lot of the things that we're working on. I thought I would start real quickly. I think most people in the room are familiar with Zone 7 of who we are. It's on and it's not moving. I've got a red dot. Oh, there we go. Real quickly, what is Zone 7? You know, when I first heard the term Zone 7, I said, you know, is that something that's in Roswell? Had to do with some sort of balloon? But no, we are a wholesale water agency. We are also flood protection for Eastern Alameda County. We're a state water project contractor. We provide treated water to about a little over 200,000 people. We serve Livermore, Dublin, Pleasanton, and Cal Water, another portion of Livermore. We also provide untreated surface water to some agricultural customers. We are also designated as a sustainable groundwater manager in the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. And we also promote environmental stewardship for watershed protection. Most of our water supply, over 80%, comes from the State Water Project. This is a picture showing California. All those little blobs you see over California are state water contractors. The key is that majority of the supply comes from snowpack in the Feather River watershed. It's captured, brought down the Sacramento River to, among others, Zone 7 Water Agency. Water is captured up here in the Delta, comes through Clifton Court. A majority of that supply actually goes down the California Aqueduct, and then some of that comes through to Zone 7, Alameda County Water District, and Santa Clara Valley Water District. Water can be moved back and forth into Lake Del Valle to help meet the needs of the valley. The key is that brought in through this area is a majority of our supplies. It's table A water, carryover water that maybe have been stored in San Luis Reservoir, dry year transfers. All of this water, though, has many uses. We deliver it to our customers, we recharge our local groundwater basin with this water, we bank it in Kern County, and we're actually in the process of piloting a storage project in Los Vaqueros. But what are we doing and what are we planning for in terms of reliability? It really starts with our urban water management plan. It assesses reliability of Zone 7 system over a 20-year period. Our first plan was completed in 2000. We've been updating it every 5 years per regulation. It outlines the status of our existing water supplies, identifies planned programs and projects that we need to move forward in order to meet future deficits between supply and demand. And it defines Zone 7's water shortage contingency plan. It was last updated in 2010, and then staff's currently working on an update for 2015. However, we know that the Urban Water Management Plan is not the only document, it's not the only way of looking at things. So we've been working pretty diligently with our local retailers, identifying robust analysis to identify most resilient solutions moving forward. And this started in 2011 with our water supply evaluation. Working really closely with our retailers, we identified over 30 different water supply options, ranging from recycled water, desalination, rainfall capture, to gray water. Some of those options, like rainwater capture or gray water, sound great, But rainwater capture, we're in an area where there's only 14.5 inches of average rainfall a year. Most of it comes between October and April. And so the yield on that is not very high. You'd have to have a lot of storage in order to capture a lot of that. And then as a major agency, you can't really count on the individual to actually maintain that. But based on that information, through this process, we developed 3 different portfolios. One was, of course, Delta-centric. The Tri-Valley is forever dependent on the State Water Project. Another one was recycled water-centric. And the third one was intertie-centric. Could we bring in, do other interties with other agencies? Are we allowed to bring in water transfers? How does that work? And then we employed a risk-based approach for identifying near-term, no-regret actions for moving forward. However, we all know that things have changed since 2011. There have been a lot of major changes that have occurred since 2011, and this drought between 2012 and 2014 has taught staff and others in the valley a lot about the vulnerability of different supply sources. Out of all these here that you see, the 3 major ones, State Water Project, Kern County Banking Program, and BBID, those were the main issues surrounding some of the deficits we saw in 2013. 2014, apologize. But the key here is the Delta fix. Regardless of what's going on right now, the ability to have supplies, the ability to recharge the groundwater basin and storage is what's impacting long-term reliability. So it is the biggest issue facing the Tri-Valley area right now. What's Zone 7 moving forward with? What are we working on? Well, it starts with an update of our water supply evaluation. What we're doing is we went back and we looked at all those different supply sources, worked closely with our retailers, developed different portfolios. The costs and supply sources are based on actual feasible source locations, pipeline alignments, and IPR, indirect potable reuse, desalination, are actually being reviewed by a consultant, HDR, for us at this time. And a lot of the options that we're looking at are leveraging the existing infrastructure that's been put in place over the last 40 or 50 years. We're evaluating those portfolios against a series of scenarios, and we're testing them using metrics. Our ultimate plan is to be able to identify and answer these questions. How resilient can the system be for the Tri-Valley area? How much will it cost, and what's an acceptable risk of shortage? And then lastly, developing a project timelines and costs, and a firm plan for moving forward. Now let's talk a little bit more about this identify scenarios and metrics. The Delta fix, Delta fix, Cal Water fix, BDCP, tomato, it's whatever the state's calling it at this time. But we are highly reliant on it right now. And it really depends on what happens with the state as it moves forward. Will the reliability of the State Water Project stay static, or will it decline? Will the Delta fix be sooner or later? And so working real closely with our retailers, we developed a set of scenarios that are going to evaluate both of those. We're looking at not only a static condition, but also an interim state water project reliability where it declines. Then we're asking ourselves, well, wait a minute, what if we get our demand projections wrong? What if build-out occurs 10 years earlier than we expected? So we're evaluating that. We're evaluating baseline demand projection. We're also evaluating an increased growth rate. And then we're asking ourselves, well, wait a minute. What if the Delta fix doesn't happen soon? What happens if it's beyond our planning horizon? What's our plan? What portfolios, what groups of projects are the most resilient to those kinds of futures? So we're looking at 8 different scenarios. In addition to that, we understand that a portfolio itself, just being able to be resilient, is dependent on many factors. For example, what's the average reliability for the overall agency and for the Tri-Valley area? How does it perform during rare, large shortages? For example, during a Delta outage due to an earthquake, water quality. How does it perform during long, extended droughts that maybe aren't in the historic record? What's the minimum supply we can provide? Health and safety needs. Average groundwater storage. Groundwater is a key component to reliability of the Tri-Valley area. Absolutely key. Diversification. How can we diversify our portfolios? A diversified portfolio allows for more resiliency moving forward. Local control. One of the key things found out between 2012 and 2014, not as much local control when you have most of your stored water in Kern County. So we're looking at options to solidify that. And then energy use, indirect potable reuse, desalination. All of these rely on heavy energy use. And so that's an important concept to consider. And then, of course, cost, obviously. In addition to that, not only are we rolling in our updated reliability numbers, but recently we found out that some of our chain of lakes, it's a former gravel quarry pits in the middle of our service area, which we use for recharge, storage. some of those lakes won't be available until 2060. So we're evaluating what those options are that we can do to alleviate that. We actually also included the effects of local climate change. And it's important to both water supply and flood protection. Don't forget, it can get just as dry and get even wetter. We also accounted for delta outages. We added conservatism to the availability of Kern County storage, our Kern County drought breaking programs down in Kern County. And then, unlike our previous effort in 2011, we're employing what we call a robust approach. We have 4 portfolios, 8 scenarios, 8 metrics, and we're subjecting them actually to different hydrologies. We're not assuming a static repeat of the historic hydrology. And let me give you an example of what that looks like. Here's a graphic. This here, let's just assume this line represents water demand as you move forward in the future. And this is timing over your planning horizon. Over here, let's just say it's acre feet. It could be anything. It could be your state water project water. It could be anything. So we pick one series of hydrologies, and then we evaluate that same set of portfolios against different hydrologies. And we'll repeat that 10,000 to 30,000 times to get an idea of what are the risks? Where are the vulnerable points within our system? How do these portfolios actually perform moving forward? So where are we headed now with our plan? We are having the initial results of our study show that IPR and desalination make a lot of sense. And what we did is hired HDR to do a review of preliminary feasible options for the Tri-Valley area. Based on their analysis and also comments that we're receiving currently from our retailers, we will update that report. And then we're going to identify and recommend a set of next steps for projects and complete our draft report. Real key to this is this study will actually feed into our urban water management plan, which is currently being developed now. And then lastly, a lot of those projects and concepts will be incorporated into our 2016 capital improvement program. Now, in addition to this planning, Zone 7 is also developing regional partnerships to improve the reliability for the entire Tri-Valley area. We actually are part of the Bay Area Regional Reliability Partnership. It's made up of this consortium of other agencies. Our board adopted the guiding principles of this group in May 2014. We have a memorandum of agreement with these agencies signed in June 2015. And in fact, this group just received a grant from Reclamation to develop a regional drought contingency plan, which we're kicking off right now. In addition to that, we're developing new regional water supplies to help benefit the entire Tri-Valley area. Zone 7 has been reviewing desalination since 2008. We actually joined a consortium of 4 other agencies in 2010, and now they're working on a Bay Area brackish water treatment plant that could provide anywhere from 10 to 20 MGD to this consortium. And we're currently developing pre-sequence scope and next steps. And then in addition to that, we're actually piloting a new drought storage option for the Tri-Valley area. We're looking at storing water in Los Vaqueros, similar to what we're doing in Kern County. The difference is Los Vaqueros is actually located north of us, not south of us. There's not as many, it gives us a greater local control over those supplies. And potentially this project will be available to actually, we'd have water available to meet demands in the summer of 2016. So with that, one other thing I will point out too, Zone 7 also has a very extensive water conservation program. We have a huge lawn replacement program. Typically, it's only about 12,000 square feet of lawn are replaced a year. The last couple of years, we're averaging 300,000 square feet.
So it's my turn, right? Okay. Good morning, everybody. Hopefully my presentation will come up. I had a little hard time putting my presentation together for today because I wasn't really sure what mix of people and what kind of a crowd we're going to have. So bear with me as I go through it. Hopefully, if you have any questions, I can answer afterwards. This is, obviously you all know, California. We are the 7th largest economy in the world. The population is growing fast, and we are the largest economy in the U.S. In California, our water resources actually are, hold on, let me see if I can get this thing. No. Okay. Okay, there you go. Okay, so our water resources are generally centered in the northern and eastern part, and this is our population density. So this map is basically shows the average precipitation throughout California, and this map shows the population density and sort of distribution in California. You can see the blue area is basically where we get most of our water, and the population is mostly located in the coastal regions and some in, this is Sacramento and Central Valley. And if you basically put these two maps together, it doesn't necessarily meet your expectations in a way that traditionally we used to live by our water resources, right? Like 300 years ago, 500 years ago, people would find a water source and then they would live close to a river, close to a lake. By the time California started getting populated, we already had a lot of engineering solution in our pockets, so we actually engineered our way out of our limitations. So we built all this various sort of, we call gray infrastructure, you can call it whatever, but big, massive, infrastructure to move water where we want to live, which is basically obviously the coastal region of California, which is beautiful, and who wouldn't want to live there? So, and also, on top of that, we moved water to the Central Valley region to actually have one of the biggest agricultural communities in the world. And that was also not necessarily a natural system. So this just shows you what California has as far as all the dams and reservoirs and aqueducts and canals and whatever you want to call it, like to move water around from east to west and north to south, and also from other states to the Southern California region. I don't expect you to necessarily see which one is which, but I'm trying to show you how complicated our system is. It's one of the most complex water systems in the world. Back here actually. And then we actually have created the system to meet all the demands that we have in the state. Obviously the cities need water, and then we use water for agriculture, navigation, recreation, wildlife, and environment, and also power and power industry. However, when we build that super complicated system that we have, from an engineering perspective, you basically take a historical view of how things happen, how things work, and you build something based on that understanding. So we had some understanding of how our water system or water cycle works in the state. So we had snow, and then snow would melt and would make it to the ocean. So what's the best way to build? We build a dam, the snow melts, we hold it behind the dam. We actually use the dam for flood control, and then you use it as a storage facility, and then that way we meet the demand during the summertime. Obviously, this worked for a long time. However, as time goes by, and as history proves that like our sort of the water system or our expectation of our weather is not necessarily repeating itself anymore, then we are having a lot of hard time managing this super complicated water system that we have in the state. So just take this, obviously we are in a 4-year drought. It's funny because everybody says this is not normal for California. I actually went through the historical data for the past 50 years. I think 28 years out of 50 years we have been in a drought. So it's actually quite normal to be in a drought all the time. But we think it's not, right? We think, no, it's just abnormal that we are having this drought. Obviously, not all of those droughts were as extensive and as severe as the one that we are in right now, but we still has been in a drought. So quickly, obviously population is growing in different neighboring states, which we share water resources with. We have come to realization in the past decade or so that we have to be, the ecosystem and environment is an integral part of our sort of healthy and happy social life that we have. So we are actually trying to take care of it. That means that we need to leave more water for the environment and actually bring the water that we are putting back in the environment to the quality it's needed. And also, obviously, climate change and climate variability is shifting the way our water sort of system used to work. So that now we have this sort of big challenge we have to deal with, which is our water system. And also our water system is now, most of it is 50 years or older, so it's sort of reaching the end of its lifetime. So obviously a lot of conversation, as Ben also mentioned, everybody's thinking, so what is our new portfolio is going to look like? What are we looking for exactly? So think about all these things that I said up to now, the whole traditional way we managed our water system. And obviously, part of the challenges we are having with our water resources is the fact some of those assumptions that we made our complicated system on are not holding anymore. So maybe we should not necessarily try to build up another bigger system on top of what we have to meet our future needs. So that kind of comes to the conversation of then maybe we need to diversify our water supply, and also maybe we need to look more locally and more regionally rather than going to other, far distances to bring what we need. So I quickly go through this because I know I have a very limited time. Through the rest of the presentation, I'm going to talk about a little bit about rethinking the demand, rethinking the supply, and rethinking the way we manage our water resources, because that's also very important. So there are a lot of innovation happening throughout the way our water system works. Traditionally, that's how it used to be. We had people who managed the water, take the water, clean the water, convey it to the people. People would use it, and then we're done with it. They would, obviously would leave your house or your business, and then somebody else would come in, which was the wastewater management people, and then they would just clean this water and dump it out back in the environment. So there was a group that did this, and there was a group that did this, and then most recently we're more talking about the fact that wastewater is not necessarily a wastewater because it's a resource that we can reuse, and that's nothing new. Any water that you're drinking, if you are downstream of somebody else, is a wastewater that has been cleaned up and put in a river again, and generally speaking, that water needs to be brought to a very, very high quality before it has been introduced to the environment. And also naturally, we all are drinking the same amount of water. I mean, the amount of water that we have had in this world hasn't changed, so this water is keep getting recycled and brought back to the earth. So all we are doing through this whole recycling is basically you're shrinking the time and cleaning it up faster and making it back to the system as fast as you can. So now we're talking a lot about that, which is obviously has changed our water use cycle significantly. So as I said, a lot of innovative solutions are out there to diversify our water supply portfolio. So I'm going to talk a little bit about rethinking demand. I'm sure a lot of you have heard about Southern California being the evil water users in the state, that they take all their water and then use it all the time for their lawns and their pools. But let me tell you one thing, actually. The past 50 years, the population in Southern California has doubled. The water use hasn't changed. The traditional way of thinking that as population is growing, our demand is growing, actually is not true anymore. And some of it is because you're actively using less water for things that you do daily. The other thing is because the technologies that we have and the different things that we use in our daily life has become a lot more efficient. Think about your washer and dryer and dishwasher and toilets and anything that you have in your house, from the faucets to the hose, and all of them are using a lot less water for what you used to do what you used to do with a lot more water before. So that actually has contributed significantly in the amount of water that we use. This I actually could not find, and that was probably my failure, not necessarily Dublin Pleasanton's water, the Department of the Water Agency's problem, but I couldn't find this map for this graph for here. So I just put an example. This is Bay Area, And you can see the population has grown 13% over the past 20 years. And the water use consumption, this is per capita, has dropped 18%. And if I put total, you see exactly the same thing actually. The water use has been dropping. So we need to actually, that's actually, there's a very important point there, which is we need to redo the way or rethink the way we project demand in the future. And stop like thinking that, okay, as population is growing, the demand is gonna grow. Obviously, fixing leaks and in the pipes is a very important thing. About 14% of our water actually in the US, not here, in the US generally, is lost because of leakage. And think about leakage, you're like, okay, leakage is fine, it just goes back to the environment. We take that water, we clean it, we use a lot of energy, we use a lot of chemicals to put it in the quality that you can drink. And that water is lost through these pipes. So we, not only we lose water, we lose energy and we lose a lot of, we spend a lot of money. So we lose money as well on the water that we lose through leakage. As Ben said, a lot of water agencies right now have this landscape modification and they're just giving a lot of rebates for water efficient appliances. That's something that's happening in California. Actually, these days I'm not even sure you can buy anything but the water efficient appliances that are out there. So, but to give you some very anecdotal information is that these water efficient appliances that you see did not come to life because of water mindfulness. They came to life because of energy crisis that we have, and we were trying to use a lot less energy. And because the more water you use, the more energy gets used. So they actually, some of these technology came to life and invested on, and that actually helped us to save water as well. Okay. Price of water, very, very important topic. I know it's a very tricky topic. We looked at this, we got actually this data from Standard & Poor. Look where US is and look where all the rest of the developed countries are. So this is the price per gallon of water people use, per 1,000 gallon actually, and this shows how much water they use per day. And look, like US, on average, we use about 170 gallons of water per day. And we pay a lot less than Denmark, Germany, France, United Kingdom. So we don't necessarily pay for this water system. I have been in meetings, or actually even gatherings that people ask me, why do we need even to pay for this water? It's just basically, the system is already built, right? Yes, but then you need to maintain, you need, 1 minute, okay. So anyway, so we don't pay enough for our water, and so that's definitely a key point in saving water. Another thing that I wanted to show was like how much we sort of collect water, collect revenue compared to capital cost of our water system. It's always underground. You don't see the pipes and everything, so you don't. It requires a lot of capital to build these systems. Okay, so I'm gonna quickly go through to rethinking supply. Ben mentioned a lot of these things, and stormwater, for the longest time, we took stormwater and we cleaned it and we dumped it out. It's a water resource that we can use. There's a lot of movement going on in the Bay Area to change the way we take stormwater and we reuse it. We are talking a lot about low impact development, making sure to create cities that are sponges. So it takes the stormwater and clean it up, use natural systems, use the soil, use the trees, use all the landscaping that we have to clean the water and then reintroduce it to the environment. So it's a big movement right now, not just for water supply, but also for water quality. And indirect portable reuse, Ben also mentioned that. This is very big in California. We were one of the first states to do this. As Orange County, it was the first county to do this, and partly because that separation between water supply and water quality wasn't there. They were both in one agency, so they worked together, and actually they cleaned the water to protect their groundwater to be sort of filled with ocean water, and gradually figured, why not using that water as a supply? So they are actually using it in Southern California, and this is something that we are talking about actually in Santa Clara, and Ben said here. We are talking a lot about wastewater, cleaning wastewater, and using the energy that's in the wastewater to clean it itself. So because wastewater is filled with methane, which is a gas that can be used to create more energy. So this is another big innovation that's happening in this area. And quickly, I'm going to talk about governance, and I'll be done. This is my last slide. Monitoring water, smart meters, like collecting information on what we use is really key in making better decisions. And that's what we are not necessarily doing very well in California. Obviously, coordinating land use and water use. The cities are growing without mindfulness of how much water do we have. Maybe we don't need to grow as much or as vast and move water everywhere for us. And I think one other very important thing is financing. Financing is a key issue to making all these things happen, from rethinking water supply to rethinking demand. You are integral part of this whole movement. And think about solar panels that are on people's roofs. They happen because there were funding available for the public to become part of this movement. And I think water agencies can also take advantage of this opportunity and become partner up with the public, as well as other water agencies, to change the way we use water and to change the way we kind of produce water in a way. And from rain barrels to stormwater capture to cleaning, to replacing all your lawns and capturing all the rainwater. All of those can be part of a bigger portfolio that we have right now in California in general and for this region. With that,
I noticed at the end of Nusha's commentary there was a triple Ps, and I was up at the latest big triple P in California, the Davis Woodland Water Supply Project, which is about half done. I was talking to Dennis Deemer, my predecessor once removed at East Bay Mud, that this is one year that neither he nor I look back fondly on being manager of East Bay Mud. Drought times 10 is what it is, and I respect and I'm glad I'm not in that position that many of you are in this year. Let me start out with, is anybody from East Bay Mud here? Ah, good. All right. Good. I was just curious because I'm going to say a couple things about one alternative a little later on, and I want to be careful. One of the things I've learned is that when you get away from a utility for a while, things happen, and there's a lot you don't know. Like to stand up here and give advice on what this region should do, it's pretty tough for somebody who doesn't know all the details that are known here in the audience. So. Let me start first with a map that you're all familiar with, but it is essentially a single resource. Not in some of the local communities and up on the Northwest, but statewide, the state is operating a single resource because you can make, if you had a free hand, if each of you were the czar of water in California, and you could figure out what the optimal way to do it, you'd have a lot of flexibility. We've got lots of problems, groundwater overdraft in the central north, and lots of other things. But if you wanted to do it right, you would stand back and you'd probably develop some kind of, using the modern technology we have, model like Jay Lund has done to determine the right storage additions to the State Water Project. And you'd expand that model to say, here are the reuse options, here are the desal options, here are the water conservation options that, as they get more expensive and get varying degrees of reliability. and you'd put that into your model and you'd figure out collectively what the best solution is. But we don't have that kind of a world. We have, if this thing, let's see. Yes, we have this kind of a world. We have a silo regulation system. We have a management system that's similarly isolated. And while we have a state water plan, it's a collection of local plans, essentially. We don't have this optimal big thing. This is the worst kind of a slide. It's got too much stuff on it. But the upper 2/3 represent the many regulations that any solution that is adopted here have to go through. And each one of those has its own set of things. And down at the bottom are some of the options that Nusha talked about that would be considered. But when an individual utility confronts the world, it's that framework that we're operating in now. And some of us would like, in fact, Craig Wilson, who was the general counsel of the State Water Board, wrote a blog about this just recently. The Constitution provides a way around all of the complexity that is known about our water allocation system. And we have the world's great expert on water rights here in the room, Mr. Maddow, and he could tell you that it's complicated and difficult. And first in time and first in right becomes the subject of a Chronicle in-depth article, great article, but that we have the tools in the Constitution now to rebalance California's water if the board would do it. But that's not the subject of this discussion. So I was asked, and this is going to be too small, but let me just, this is B.J. Miller's summary of the DSRSD portfolio options. I was asked to take a look at the alternatives report and make some observations about it. And one alternative struck me, but let me just point out that in the case of DSRSD, they have a foundation for adopting good alternatives. And that's the Reuse Foundation, which is a pioneering effort. And they have a neighbor utility to the north that has recently been able to augment their supply, which I will talk about in a minute, but in a way that could provide DSRC with some diversity. How that would work out with the Zone 7 options and all, I don't know. But that's a local issue, and I'm sure people are going to be working about that. But anyway, I'm in favor of the top two things here. That is, try to diversify supply. You do that by getting an additional supply through the state project or through other sources. And the portfolio options don't include that one source that seems to me to be worth pursuing. And BJ will talk some more about the scope of the future investigation, but the costs of desal, however, what's the right word, politically or philosophically attractive, the costs and energy demands and institutional requirements, that whole chart that I had before was the framework for which the Carlsbad desal plant went through, and it took 13 years. And each project of that magnitude is something else. But this is from the alternatives report. If you look at the green line on the north there, McCollum Aqueduct, it brings water in from a different direction, and because of the activation of the American River supply by East Bay Mud through the Prefort diversion, which is shown in this slide from that report, the East Bay Mud originally was going to, whoops, oh dear. All right, we'll get there. Yeah. All right. Now, up here, East Bay Mud was originally going to divert its allowed water supply, which was a balance between environmental needs in the American River and the Sacramento River, and the demands that East Bay Mud wanted to augment its McCollum system with here. Well, the original plan was to divert the water this way. An agreement was reached with Sacramento to divert the water this way, but it achieves the same purpose with more limits on diversion times and quantities. But once you have an intake here, you have East Bay Mud's version of a delta fix. So there is an opportunity here for DSRSD, which down here is adjacent to the East Bay Mud system, to explore the possibility of creating reliability by purchasing water in Northern California somewhere. And let me stop right there. One of the problems with purchases is that they tend to be annual. And water supplies demand long-term reliability. And while the system has accommodated annual transfers, it has not promoted long-term transfers. And long-term economic transfers could be beneficial to the farmers and to the water utilities of the state if the state would develop a way of facilitating them. In any event, East Bay Mud has used, this year, is using water from purchased water that is diverted here, brought down the aqueduct system. Now, there has been some discussion in the report about this particular option of bringing water from Walnut Creek south. East Bay Mud has a whole water system here. It was designed for demands on a per capita basis that are substantially more than those that now exist. And here's where I tread into dangerous territory. But I'll say it anyway. But it would be interesting to look at the East Bay Mud's seasonal demands in this system that exists now and augmentation of DSRSD's water supplies by this route, which creates geographic diversity, two independent supplies, and makes their system more reliable. And maybe, just maybe, this system could be adapted to deliver the water without constructing this brand new pipeline down through here, which, to say the least, would be disruptive and costly and would have to go through the hurdles in slide number 2. This is a sort of a summary conclusion. As I said, I think it's important to focus on those things that are there's some basis for now. And alternatives by transfer, either by enhancing the State Water Project water, as was spoken earlier about, or by enhancing reuse. And it would be an opportunity to blend treated wastewater in one of the big reservoirs here, like Del Valle. That would be an interesting thing if you could get approvals to do that. It would be a creative thing to do, and it would create a reliable water source that could benefit more than DSRSD. I mentioned the issue, or I did it again. Can you help me here, will you? We ought to look at the effects of the existing use of the existing systems, whether it be East Bay. For instance, there's an alternative of a desal plant in the bay. But that plant costs include a pipeline from the bay up here with the pumps and all the attendant facilities. Well, why wouldn't it make sense to you, if you were going to build that project, which I would have some doubt about, but if you're going to build that project, why not deliver the water immediately to Hayward or East Bay Mud and then transfer a similar quantity of water to the valley through the East Bay Mud connection as just one example. The other thing I want to emphasize is the seasonality. The delivery of water peaks, as you all know, and the shortage here is for total supply. And perhaps DSRSD has the capability to meet peaks, but not total supply, in which case they don't have to draw on East Bay Mud, for instance, if that alternative was pursued, wouldn't have to draw on them during times of peak demand, but in times when water would be available. Another thing I noticed in the report, and I think it's important to consider, when people figure out the cost of water supply, they tend to figure out what the cost is to them. What is the cost to DSRSD of a particular option? In fact, in one of the options, such as the toilet replacement program, the Zone 7 provided an incentive payment, DSRSD provided incentive payment, and the homeowner had to go to some expense in addition that wasn't perhaps covered by the payment. And shouldn't the total cost of each option be considered? I think that's really important, and when you consider the total cost, the favorability of the option changes. And finally, I'd like to say that I thought the district did a great job, or the authors of the report did a great job in framing the problem, and now the framing needs to be further developed, and the criteria that were the basis for the initial framing, the percentage of water supplies that you relied upon from each source, ought to be revisited, because with greater information about the individual project options, you can do a much more practical allocation of which are the major sources you rely on. Thank you.
BJ, you're on camera, so you've got the final say. So give us your wisdom from Louisville.
Well, thank you. Welcome to the Commonwealth of Kentucky. I hope my head is not 5 feet high there in Pleasanton. I'm delighted to say that I can neither hear nor see the person keeping time. But on the possibility she may have other options at her disposal, like just disconnecting me, I'm going to jump right into this. I share Jerry's compliments about this report. I thought it was really good. It was short. It was easy to read and understand. It was well written, and it was comprehensive in nature. I thought it was an excellent screening analysis and a really good start. I have some comments on it, but I wouldn't want those to detract from my otherwise good opinion of what you've done so far. I share Jerry's concern about the pre-selection of portfolios. It occurs to me that realities might dictate a different way of thinking about this problem. Let me briefly summarize what I see are the realities. First, the state water project supplies are unreliable. That's probably why we're all meeting today. More serious droughts are likely. There are serious concerns about whether these tunnels will ever get built. And if they are built, there are concerns about the nature of the operating requirements and the high cost per acre foot delivered. There's a trend toward more stringent environmental constraints on exports, and that's likely to continue. So I think you'd have to conclude that these supplies are unreliable, and therefore, to the extent that Zone 7 relies on those supplies, and the Zone 7 supplies are similarly unreliable, although I thought what the first speaker said was quite heartening. about Zone 7's similar kind of multi-option approach to matching up future supplies and needs. On the other hand, the state project supplies are cheap, relatively the marginal cost, because everything's been built pretty much, except for those tunnels. It's already implemented, there are contracts. So my thought is you should use as much of that as you can get your hands on. And it's probably not going to be enough, certainly not reliably enough. Similarly, I think you could say the same thing about non-potable reuse. You're already doing it, it's highly reliable. Do it as much as possible. Get more water for recycling if you can. Then there are these options that were labeled 1A through D, which are the kind of extremely local options, the turf replacement, local stormwater use, and the like. You know, they don't produce very much water, at least in the report did not calculate that much water would be produced by those. And the dollar per acre foot cost is really high for some of them. But then they really don't cost that much, you know, when in actual dollars rather than dollars per acre foot. And I think, although there are people who are certainly more expert at this than I am, these kind of options have a tremendous public information, public relations value. They allow the customers to participate, so to speak, in solving the problem. And I think that might be their most valuable utility. And that leaves these other options that would fulfill two purposes. One would be to provide enough water to meet normal, what you might call normal year demands, if you can define that nowadays, that are not fulfilled by the state project and non-potable reuse. And then second, to provide fill-in supplies when the state project supplies are curtailed, as it appears that they might increasingly be in the future. Now, all of these other options have a charitable characterization would be implementation uncertainties. There could be customer objections to cost or concerns about any form of potable reuse, even indirect. There could be unwillingness of potential partners, other agencies, to participate. There, of course, will be environmental objections, and those could be manifested in the highly stringent regulatory requirements. Let's see, let me get to. So there are no guarantees of implementation of any of these options. The uncertainties abound about each of them. So my suggestion for the way forward is that you basically pursue each of these other options to the point of what you might call the fatal flaw. In other words, that's when, you know, whoever's responsible for a particular option, be it desalting or making a deal with a water agency north of the Delta or East Bay Mud or whatever, somebody comes to the board of the services district and basically says, you know, we gave it our best shot and it ain't gonna happen. Okay, here's what we ran into and we just can't pull this one off. And that could be the case for almost any option, I think. It's not easy to get things done in water in California anymore. So more than, I think it's pretty clear that the report recognizes this. There's a nice table in there about all the sort of non-engineering, non-analytical things that have to be done for each of these options. So my thought is that more than analysis, the biggest problem is likely to fall in the realm of deal making and customer public relations, and the pursuit of any one option, given those kinds of difficulties, might tax the capabilities of DSRSD, much less the pursuit of each of those other options. So I think a serious and commendable effort is going to be required. There's possibility of help from above, so to speak, grants, Zone 7 or the state contractors or DWR, other water agencies with similar problems. But now in California, in my opinion, there has to be some tail wagging the dog aspects of securing a future water supply for any local district. And it's probably going to continue to be that way. My thought is that the Dublin-San Ramon district, community services district, has to absolutely take responsibility for their own water supply. You simply can't rely on anyone else, although you certainly should work closely with them and hope that the best is done up above. And I think this report is a really good first step in that direction. Thanks.
Okay, now this is the time for questions and other ideas. So I'm going to start it off with a question to the panel, all four. Given your thoughts, what would you do to stimulate innovation, and not only in policy, but innovation in how to accomplish a more diversified portfolio?
Go ahead. I'll go after.
Sure. Everyone picking me up here? Okay, great. I really think that the beginning of developing any sort of diversified portfolio, especially considering some of the options we're looking at, really relies heavily on partnerships and local collaboration. I think that's really where it starts.
I think it's a multi-dimensional problem or answer. One is that you need to have sort of innovative policies. And obviously we need to kind of change the way we think about our water system. And I think part of that is happening right now in the state and locally, and I think public awareness is very high as well. So it's a combination of public and policymakers, both sort of looking at this crisis as an opportunity point. So crisis is actually the best thing that can happen for innovation. I think the second thing that we have noticed comparing water to energy has been the fact that there have been enough money and incentives out there for innovation. Obviously, I think I'm going back to pricing again. I think pricing is a very important signal for the way that we actually fund our water system, and also we invest in the future of our water system. And right now, the way we price our water is not necessarily reflects that. So rethinking our water rate structure is very important. And I'm not talking about raising it or bringing it down, but just rethinking the way we structure our water rate. And then I think the third thing is having financing options out there available for implementing and sort of doing research, development, and dissemination of some of these solutions that are already out there, but they need to be tested and see if they are practical enough to be brought for commercialization.
Well, there are a number of things, but the one that strikes me is the one I mentioned. If DSRSD, in cooperation with Zone 7, or however you want to do it, could develop a long-term transfer from north of the Delta in cooperation with delivery with East Bay Mud, and I emphasize the long term, that would be a sort of a first of that kind of thing in California, instead of waiting till the drought occurs and then trying to make a transfer.
BJ, any thoughts?
Yeah, I'm not so sure that diversification it should be an end in itself. I mean, it seems to me the responsibility of DSRSD is to provide a consistently reliable matching up of supplies and needs. And I'm not saying consistently reliable water supply, because there's definitely a demand side to this. So I think a better way to put it is you're trying to match up supplies and needs, and you have to do that year in and year out, and you have to do it in a way that's acceptable and fair to the customers. And if you can do that, if you could do that with one source of water that is no diversification at all, then you would have satisfied your goal. And so, as I see it, reliability, that sort of consistent year in, year out reliability without this hardship that's occurring now, ought to be the goal. If diversification is necessary to accomplish that, then diversification becomes the goal. But if it's not, if you could do it with just one sort of diversification, which is, say, something like the one Jerry mentioned, then, you know, I would pursue that one.
Okay, so now you've all been perfect audience. You've been silently intent. This has been a great hour of your attention. So who has a burning question to ask of the panel?
I'd like to hear from the panel a little bit more about some of the pricing options that you've seen, particularly ones that I know I've heard about from Australian experiences of developing exchanges and market exchanges. So just like to hear the panel's thoughts, kind of the wacky ways of thinking of pricing.
Okay, if I may, I'm going to repeat the question. I'm going to try to repeat the question so BJ can hear it. And that is, what are the panel's thoughts on pricing mechanisms, changes in pricing mechanisms, and maybe even refer to an Australian experience?
I actually would like to, if you don't mind, or is that okay, Jerry? Can I go first?
Sure.
Okay. I didn't mention this in my presentation, but I think that you pointed out a very important thing. You know, these days we do everything in a dynamic way, right? We have Uber that you just change price within hours depending on what's going on. Even the babysitters now have dynamic pricing. So why not water? And I think we have a research project we're looking into, and I think it's very important, Bay Area and this region as well, they have the opportunity to do this, which is you don't need to build things anymore. You can basically, because we already have a system that shares a big pool of water, maybe we can actually provide a data system that you can exchange this water in a more dynamic way. And obviously, it's very, it might sound a little naive for people who have been doing this forever, and they think, you know, like all the complications that can come to mind. But the reality is you need to think outside the box, and unless you try to have a more creative way of exchanging goods, you're basically back in the same path you used to be.
Well, I have a long talk about this. I don't think, just to maybe oversimplify first, I don't think you can price water high enough to affect demand seriously. You look at the monthly cost now and double it and compare it with other costs, except for people who are in economic difficulty, in which case the utility has to provide some affordable out for those folks. But so I don't think that direction of pricing is it. And I think so price doesn't really become a limiting factor. If the only alternative for the Bay Area was desal, leaving aside the energy component and the global warming issues, if that was the option, it could be afforded. They're affording 10% of their supply in San Diego. So I think that pricing should reflect the value of water, and the big issue in California is balancing water for agricultural use and urban use, and you all know that. So the question is, how can you do that in a way that gives you urban reliability and agricultural economic protection? And that economic protection has two things. One, the farmer's business thing, and the other is the economy of the region, including employment of the people in the Central Valley. So somehow that And that's the thing I mentioned at first. We have to have a system, or would love to have a system that's more flexible, so that you can put water where its value reflects its demand. And that's what's important in California. Right now, we have all kinds of restrictions.
I think going back to partnerships and collaboration, setting up exchanges. What are you exchanging? With what facilities? And how are you doing that? And that takes a lot of upfront work. And a lot of the stuff that Zone 7 is working on right now through the Bay Area Regional Reliability Partnership sets up that framework. And that's a lot of the things that we're starting to work on now. Whether it's wheeling water from Northern California through EB-MUD system, well, what facilities are you using? How much is that costing EB-MUD customers? How does that get translated into the cost, ultimately, to the Tri-Valley area?
Their cost should be reduced as a
So-
result of facilitating such a,
Hopefully, you would think so. But ultimately, though, that collaborative effort is going to lead, ultimately, I think, into some of the mechanisms that you're explaining now.
BJ?
I just have a small thought on this. That is, if the cost of a particular level of reliability gets to be pretty high, one possibility might be to let the people for whom that high reliability is most valuable pay more for it. Maybe some people, won't care that much, and other people might care a lot. People who care a lot, they pay more.
Next question.
Topic is more along the lines of a lot of our discussion here is talking about our urban environment, and I think demand reduction has been happening. I'm sure even here in Pleasanton, Dan Martin is probably somewhere in here, or Kathleen, they can probably tell you our demand in Pleasanton has gone down as time has gone on, but the question is more about within the state with our economy, with agriculture, and I'm guessing agriculture uses, 50, 60, 80% of the water in the state somewhere. How exactly does that fit in? And aren't we sort of playing a game of chicken, ultimately, with the state water between agriculture and then really, which is probably...
So let me try. The statement is, are we playing a game of chicken between urban and ag interests? And then what's the relationship between what is happening in urban water demand and agricultural stuff? I'm going to toss this to you, BJ, first, because I know you've got lots of experience in working with the Central Valley interest.
For years, I taught a course on the management of water in California, and one of the things I covered was agricultural conservation and why the individual actions of Central Valley farmers to save water didn't really produce any water. I was never successful at explaining that, and I doubt that I will be today, but I can give it a quick try. If you think about the Central Valley, it's a giant basin, and down the trough of this basin runs the Sacramento River from the north and the San Joaquin River from the south. And all water that doesn't escape, by evapotranspiration, basically ends up in the delta. And on its way, it passes through one farm after another, so that each farmer's waste becomes another farmer's supply. So that while individually these farmers may not be that efficient, collectively they are ruthlessly efficient by an accident of geography. There have been several studies done of this, of how much water would be produced, that it would show up at the delta available for use by others, given various levels of individual on-farm increases in efficiency. And the amounts of water are very, very small given the huge expense that actually many farmers are incurring because they themselves don't want to use very much water. But they are extremely efficient. Now, farmers in other regions that drain into unusable waters like the Salton Sea down in the Imperial Valley, there you don't have the same situation, so that increases in on-farm efficiency can really pay off, which is why you have these deals being made between Southern California urban users and farmers in the Imperial Valley. You know, farms in the Central Valley may be individually not as efficient as they could be, but collectively they're extremely efficient. Still, there are opportunities certainly to make deals with irrigation districts, individual farmers for water, and urban agencies could certainly pursue those. There will be oversight by the State Water Resources Control Board to make sure that the amount of water that's transferred and when it's transferred is not damaging the economy of the area from which it's being transferred. But there are definitely opportunities there, but they're limited, as Jerry says, by the fact that we don't really have a statewide efficient water market.
Well, let me make a footnote to BJ's. It seems to me there's two ways you can achieve this objective. One is a regulatory way. If the state board were willing to implement the reasonable use requirement of the Constitution, which would require a massive set of criteria that are flexible and vary from year to year on what is reasonable use by industry and agriculture and urban, that's one way, not very likely. Or the other way, which would be if the state board did what some suggested back in the '91 drought, which would be to create a state water bank, set up the criteria for the buyers and sellers so that it became a focus of an exchange of water at a price that reflected market values. And that would have a way for the farmers to achieve benefits and for urban suppliers to get reliability. I don't know if there's any sympathy for that kind of a thing in Sacramento, but it's a possibility.
I just want to add actually a little point to this. BJ is right. When agriculture uses water, their leftover goes to the next farm or gets used again. The challenge here is, though, you need to think about quality, and that's what we never think about. Every drop of water that gets used in the farm, more than what it has to be used, it gets polluted and then introduced back to the environment. And the water that comes out either sort of percolates to the groundwater or leaves the farm, is not necessarily, doesn't get cleaned up. So I think the value of being more efficient in farm can be like having, protecting our water sources from pollution. And the second thing I wanted to mention is, you're right. Urban areas have been saving a lot of water, and the simple fight always in California, there have been multiple. One is between urban and ag, and the other one is between north and south. And I think this drought has brought to light the fact that we should not think about all these things as separate entities. We all are in it together. This is our water resources. We all should try our best to save water. Obviously, agriculture should do, and urban areas should also try their best to save as much water as they can. So I don't necessarily think we should think about this as a separate line between different sectors.
The only thing I would add is a more local perspective on that, and that, to me, the connections between ag and urban, and that sort of who's using more water becomes another uncertainty associated with exports, especially if you're even looking at Northern California transfers. And it really underlines the need to really focus on both local supplies like indirect polar reuse, recycled water, maybe even more localized Bay Area options like brackish water treatment.
Who's next?
Maybe the only agricultural else in here, but when you listen to agriculturists, they don't necessarily only talk about the conflict between urban and agriculture. They also include environment. And none of you have ever talked about that. And in their dialogue, the environmental uses are just as in conflict as the urban uses. And none of you have addressed that, but it'd be nice if you did, because that is
I didn't mention that in my talk.
Yeah, and in fact, the silos I showed were at least 50% environmental.
So let me
And-
repeat that for BJ, is the fact is that I think it was a comment, not necessarily a question, what about the pressure points caused by environmental opinions and regulations and advocacy? I think, is that correct? Anyway, so Nusha, you jumped in there first, so.
No, I just said, like, it was in my little flow chart that I had, and I said, the reality is environmental and ecosystem health is becoming more of a, we are realizing it's very important to our states. And definitely there are a lot of regulations to protect the environment, and also, obviously, we have a big environmental movement in the state that also fights for environmental rights. And you're right, there's a conflict between the two, but the reality is we have to protect the environment. We can't, otherwise we're gonna lose a lot of our environmental resources that we have in the state. So, but I hear you, I think.
Well, let me add to that a little bit at the risk of, but in this situation I can do it. It seems to me that environmental values have achieved a rigidity historically that is only compromised when we're in an extreme situation like this year. And that it isn't a fixed thing. It isn't so much water will save the smelt. It isn't so much prevention of a dam construction over in a certain valley that Bob knows about it will save the Alameda whip snake. It is that these are not rigid things, but our laws have made them more or less rigid, except in times of crisis. And it seems to me, if all the utilities like DSRSD are faced with these options, that the environmental effects should be a flexible option as well. How much reliability? How much risk is reasonable? But we're not really set up to do that.
BJ?
Yeah, I've worked a lot on this in my career, and what I'm observing is, I think some of the environmental requirements that we have are not necessarily consistent with the best science. Some of them seem to be more based on ideology than science, but there is definitely a movement. I mean, my grandchildren aren't going to have any problems with environmental requirements. Probably my children aren't either. And the thing I've observed that's fascinating to me is that it seems to be no longer quite worth it for the public water agencies, the leadership of the public water agencies, to fight over environmental requirements, to fight the requirements, so to speak. That can lead to, say, a difficult professional life if you're if you're engaged in that. It's just not fashionable. It's an amazing, it's an amazing thing to watch. But I do observe that there's people who are deciding, you know what, it's just not worth the fight. It's too difficult to fight, and you can't win.
Go ahead.
From the younger generation, I think that when you think of environmental regulations and how rigid they are, The approach that Zone 7 is taking, particularly with our stream management master plan, is a more collaborative approach with those regulatory agencies. And in fact, rather than looking for single source type solutions that are only meant for one purpose, we're extrapolating that and looking for multi-purpose type solutions. So for example, we have projects right now where we've actually just implemented one where we took a huge fish barrier. It was a large energy dissipation structure, and we removed it from the arroyo. And instead, we accomplished that same energy dissipation by stretching it out. We're able to remove a fish barrier. At the same time, we're also able to slow, spread, and sink, which promotes groundwater recharge. So we're looking for opportunities to implement multi-benefit projects that accomplish more than one goal. And I think sitting down with your regulators, understanding what their needs are, what their concerns are, and being able to fold that into your particular project is the way forward.
Naively simple in my observation. Nisha, you talked about the planet having a finite amount of water, and it's really a matter of accelerating the process to get more potable water. We have a gap that exists here in our supply and demand equation. I was encouraged, Jerry, to hear you say that we may be able to desal water up in the North Bay or over in Hayward, connect it to existing lines, and get it into the system. That seems like a real straight line for me between 2 points with minimal cost and probably a minimal amount of time to get there. What stands in our way of pursuing that sounds also, as Jerry mentioned, might be public desire, will, or fiefdoms, or whatever it is. How do we get over the hurdle to the simple solution?
So, BJ, the question is how, to those in the audience, and particularly panelists, is there's very simple solutions. Why does it take so damn much work to find the answers? And particularly, I think the point was the possibility of desal along the bayfront and how that system could be built and water transferred into this valley.
Well, since he mentioned my name, I'll take advantage of that. Why would you, technically you can build all the desalters in the world. Why would you create that kind of an energy demand and all of the construction problems associated with that at a cost of maybe 5 times what it would cost you to transfer rice every 4th year from farms in Yolo County? I mean, what would motivate you other than the fact that one might be doable and the other one not? I mean, that's a real key factor. But assuming they're both doable, and they have been doable in dry years, why would you do that? And it seems to me from an environmental standpoint and from a cost standpoint, desal would probably increase the water rate somewhere by 25–30%, something like that, if it was a significant quantity of water.
Well, let me pause here for a minute. It is now 10 o'clock, and we said that would be our time to adjourn, so we've already run late. I know that James has some closing comments, but I'm also told that this facility remains available for the continuation. So I guess it's really a question to those who still have some unanswered questions. I saw one over there. How many others would like to ask a question? 2. And then since we announced that this would go to 10 o'clock, those that feel that they must get back to work and not continue to be so engaged, certainly feel free to do that. So, James, with your consent, can we take the 2 questions and then we'll wrap it up? Okay. Back there.
I'm going to ask Nuja, specifically, she mentioned in her presentation the idea of some sort of consumer-based financing program to encourage the use of, I assume, gray water or stormwater systems locally at the actual use point and the point of which the water is available And it seems to me that financially, that would be a much more doable and easily implemented program than to build a bunch of desal plants and recycle plants all over. Because you're right there. Those are the people that have the water. Those are the people that are using the water. And it seems to me like that is an excellent life cycle option. And it's something that the agency should consider as a whole, is how do you take this program and make it possible, rather than, you know, $2 million a mile for pipe, $60 million for a new treatment plant. I mean, that's a lot of money. How many of these localized gray water / stormwater capture systems can you install for that? And what kind of water can you get out of that?
Okay, the question, so it's more, the question relates to on-site, parcel by parcel water efficiencies by using gray water or decentralized types of treatment technologies and the question is why, how can the public agencies, public utilities, and other public entities become supportive of such a concept?
So I go back to desal and then go there because it's very much connected. If you have, I mean, the whole local solutions, I cannot tell you that's going to save this much water and that's how much, you know, you need, and you know you're not going to need another options. But again, this needs to be part of the bigger portfolio. And I also agree with Jerry. I don't think desal is the best option on the portfolio because you see a lot of examples of that in Santa Barbara is a great example, and Australia is even better example of that because all these desal plants are sitting idle, and it's not like you can close the door and say, bye, I'm going to come back in 10 years and turn you on. You have to invest year after year to maintain these systems, and they're super costly. And that's why actually Santa Barbara ended up selling all the content of their desal plant to I think, Emirates. And then they had to rebuy it again this year because they wanted to reoperate the system. So it's a very costly option, hard to maintain. Share financing, I think, I think Jerry also mentioned, which was a great way of saying it, and was sort of exactly what I was trying to say was, you have this opportunity to have the public, since you have a lot of public awareness, to get public to invest in these systems. Obviously, the return of this investment is very slow since their water rates are very low. But the and you know, our survey after survey, we have seen that generally, like about 30% of the people implement these kind of solutions because they're environmentally aware and they're interested, but 70% do it just because they want to save money. And this was the survey that has been done for solar panels, actually, which I think is very relevant to the same sort of local solutions. But you know, San Francisco now is doing it, on-site reuse. They actually provide $500,000 to developers for these high-rises to implement these on-site reuse because they have come to realization that we cannot build a recycle plant in downtown San Francisco. There's no land, it's so expensive. We're gonna give money to these developers. They can put another, like, you know, they can invest their own money on top of that and build this system and then share the water within a neighborhood, actually. It's not just a building. They can share with multiple buildings can share this financing cost and the resources. So I think that's a great option. It can definitely put a dent in our water needs, and then we can have more conversation about, okay, so what are our other options that we have on the table that we should consider? And I think one other thing I wanted to mention here is, we didn't talk about it a lot, but the tailored water is a big, I think it's a very good solution to a lot of our problem, and I tell you what it means, but, so you basically clean the water to the level that's needed, right? So if you live in Hayward, and you have all these commercial buildings and industries that can use less water for different purposes, why would you just give them the most valuable high-level water? Maybe Hayward can actually use that water and store it somewhere and clean up their wastewater for flushing the toilets or for industries that they use water there. So it's a very big, simple example West Basin in Southern California actually is already doing that. It's not an uncommon thing. But my point is, I think you're right. It can definitely put a dent, and then maybe we don't need to go to desal. We can come up with smaller solutions.
Okay, any other comments? And then, if not, then there was one more question down here.
Hi, I'm on the Livermore Planning Commission, and I'm here really, I'm far less expert than I think many people in this room, so I'm really here to get educated on this issue so I can just better understand it in some of the projects I'll be reviewing in my role there. So I'm a little confused about whether they're really, to the extent of the supply-demand gap. I've heard it mentioned. I really don't quite understand how big that is. I've heard at the beginning of several of the talks refer to the fact that we have these cycles of drought, and then we recover, drought, and we recover, and that may just be, on the geological time frame, how it's going to be going forward. And then I saw also the statistics about how our population is growing, and yet we're conserving at a rate that even exceeds our population growth. I think that's what I saw in one of the graphs. So if we presume that over and over a few years we replace we recover our supply, while on one hand I love the idea that crises lead to innovation, that's always important for us to keep moving forward, just like in the energy issue 40 years ago. What is the real severity of this issue? And I know that's a kind of a naive question, but on the other hand, I feel like it's really important to come back to that as how big is the problem? I can't quite get my head around it, and you're all more expert than I am, so I'm hoping I can just get...
That's a great question, which is from a community perspective, what is the real definition of a supply-demand gap? And I would say it's an education communication issue, and it's I'm going to use my prerogative here. It's something that this panel hasn't studied, so they don't know the answer to your question for your community. So it's really a question back to individual communities, is to do. Okay, those of you who know me, sometimes I will exert my opinion. So my opinion here is that that is the type of hard question that really needs to be addressed within your community. It's got to be addressed in a challenge the professionals to get away from the terminology that they're comfortable with in the water business, to get it back to the point of really trying to define all of the assumptions that lead to the supply-demand equation. And your community is different than that of which is in Pleasanton, and different than what's in Dublin and San Ramon. But it really should be the challenge to the utility people that are doing their urban water management plan to really make that simply understood, and make sure that they do, and make sure that that gets communicated. And I will also say that as an engineer, as practice, we engineers immediately jump to solutions-oriented rather than trying to define the problem. You're asking, please define the problem.
That is that what I've heard by all the panelists is that this is a regional issue. It's not really a local issue. We have to be thinking more on a regional, even a statewide basis on how do we better share the water. How do we move it to the right place? Maybe there's enough. Maybe we're just not moving it as efficiently.
Well, Jerry mentioned that, and there is an effort with Professor Lana Davis to try to come up with a statewide model about the most efficient way of meeting the supply-demand equation, and that's work that needs to be encouraged.
Yeah. Could I add just something? I think it's a good point because it highlights the fact that it's a statewide system. It's not being operated that way, but it is. Okay. But within that, each local area may have preferences. For instance, there's been an extreme effort to curtail lawn watering or irrigation of landscaping. Some communities may feel that we're spending the money to reclaim water that currently is not being used for that purpose. They might want to find other methods of collective gray water, for instance, or something. If they want to spend the money to do that locally, to create a different set of local priorities within the overall framework of California. So there are issues like that.
Okay, I'm going to bring this to close because James wants to kick me off stage. But in doing so, Georgine Von Heater, who is still here, Georgine asked me a question out in the foyer before. She's here to try to get a sense of what does business think about this topic. And so I'm going to try to put in perspective a couple things. One is the role of the East Bay Leadership Council and the Water Task Force has a couple roles. One is to try to create the environment for this kinds of discussions, these forums, to pose the questions using the knowledge and expertise of those who have got particular expertise, and try to get that communicated out into the community for where the eventual decision making has to be made. It's definitely at the local, it's at each boardroom, it's at each planning commission where these types of decisions, the better knowledge that we can convey on the issues, maybe those decisions can be better decisions. As far as the Water Task Force, and therefore as we have conveyed what our collective thinking is, and the collective thinking is those who regularly attend and the support of the water utilities that all attend, and DSRSD, Zone 7, East Bay Mud, Contra Costa Water District, and others. We proposed and adopted a regional water resources strategy, a copy of which is out on the table, 6 points, and therefore, at least that's our view from representing the business community of water resources. The 6th point is the most important. They're all very important, but the 6th one is encourage regional collaboration at all levels. And so that efforts are underway, and we as an organization will continue to be very supportive and very much advocates for those points. What we won't do is we're not going to get in the middle of whether DSRSD is right in its approach or not. We're as have been said, we're supportive very much of the efforts that have gone on to look at different portfolios to broaden the horizon, but the absolute numbers, we're not going to take up that kind of a question at the East Bay Leadership Council, even though we encourage that take place. Finally, I guess, the privilege of time, because I've lived long enough, I don't know why, but I have lived long enough so that I am now have the privilege of being able to draw, I'm required, Congress requires me to draw down on my IRA account every year. And I put forth to you the perspective of what does a portfolio mean. Portfolio means you want some type of balance approach to the future and your own lifestyle. You don't put all your eggs in one basket. You have fixed income investments, you have muni bonds, you have some Apple stock and others. And so that's, when we talk about diversification, I do make that analogy from the business investment perspective. You know, spread it around, don't put everything in one place. With that, I'm so privileged that we've had this panel and that are here. And I want to thank each of them, but what I want to also convey that the 3 outsiders who are very busy in their own lives have all volunteered to do this as a public service to this community. They have not received any compensation. They haven't received any expenses. So the community needs to show a lot of gratitude to these three very experienced people for their willingness to take the time, their experience, and their opinions. So with that, And for the kid on the panel, you know, Brad, you got another 20 years to gain some of that experience, and so you can volunteer your time back to the community. So with that, I guess anybody who's interested in the DSRSD report and proposed policy, Redora Biakton, right here, Redora, you can be approached. I believe there's copies of the executive summary also outside. And then also one last thing, an announcement of next month's Water Task Force meeting. Topic will be on-site treatment, gray water treatment systems in local projects, local parcels. So anybody who's interested, please attend our next meeting. James, thank you very much for attendance. James?
Thank you, Bob, and thank you all for your kind attention and your participation this morning. Actually, Bob covered a lot of the things that I wanted to say in conclusion, but let me just extend on a couple of thoughts. One thing that I have observed in the Tri-Valley is that when the communities come together and form a consensus approach, we can do anything. And you have to do nothing but look at the transportation projects that are going on right now to get a sense of what we can do collectively. When we align our agendas and we develop consensus, we can move mountains, and we've shown that time and time again. I would submit that the one C word that I think I would encourage you to take away with you is that consensus word. I think this is something that we need to do and start to really work on developing quickly. With that, one of the things that I really appreciate both about the Pleasanton Chamber and the East Bay Leadership Council is their sort of big tent approach to building this consensus. If you look around the room today, you'll see business representatives, community leaders, agency representatives, elected officials. It takes that body. Let me talk to the business representatives for just a moment. You are really key stakeholders here, and I would really encourage you to stay involved in these issues. I really enjoyed all of the analogies with the oil crisis. Crisis does start to sharpen one's mind and kind of encourage solutions that maybe weren't always on the table earlier. But what I would also submit was that all of these problems and things that we're confronted with are only reach their solution with stakeholder involvement, and the business community is a really, really key stakeholder. Three things that I would just sort of offer for you in terms of things you can start to think about over the next few weeks and ways that you can participate as a stakeholder. One, as was mentioned, the Dublin-San Ramon Services District report and the policy program that they're proposing for discussion is available in comment through October 6th. I would encourage you to reach out, find that, and if you're inspired to do so, comment. Let your voice be heard. It's incredibly important. Likewise, number two, with your elected officials, it's incredibly important that they hear the business perspective. You need to reach out to both agency representatives, those who represent you in your community, and let them know how important this issue is to you, how important it is to reach consensus, and the imperative that we really need to address these issues soon. Third, I would encourage you to stay involved. As you saw today, this is not necessarily an easy topic. It's complicated. There's a lot of issues. And it does take a little bit more of your involvement and attention than maybe you would normally give to something like this. But it is important, and I would encourage you to think about it as a business issue and something that's important to the continued economic prosperity in the region. And it's worthy of your time and attention. So there will be forums, additional forums, and I want to, again, give a big shout out to both Kristen Connolly, East Bay Leadership Council, Scott Rady with the Pleasanton Chamber for their leadership in helping bring together this forum this morning. If you would all thank them as well. Also, again, thanks again to the City of Pleasanton for making the venue available. Thank you to CTV 30, who has been filming this today. This will be rebroadcast, and we will also make sure that through the two groups that I mentioned, that you get access to the presentation materials and other information about the work of both of those bodies. And if you are a business representative here and you'd like to learn more about the work of both the Pleasanton Chamber and the East Bay Leadership Council, you have the two leaders here, and they're available to you after we leave today. And again, thank you for your participation. Very much appreciated. Look forward to seeing you at future events.